They called security on her before she even said a word. No greeting, no questions asked, just two officers summoned like backup, walking straight toward a black woman standing in line with a first-class boarding pass in her hand. The gate agent didn't even glance at the ticket. It wasn't necessary. "Ma'am, step aside." Those 4 short words were spoken with the kind of finality reserved for a criminal, not a customer. As she was quietly pulled from the queue, eyes followed her, not in protest, but in confirmation, because to them she didn't look like someone who belonged in Seat 1A, not with that skin, not with that simple appearance, and certainly not with that calm, quiet demeanor. But here was the truth that no one at the gate could imagine. Not the flight crew, not the smug supervisor standing by the counter, and certainly not the man who walked through after her without so much as a glance at his ID. The woman they had just tried to humiliate didn't just buy a first-class ticket. She owned something far more powerful than that. Today, Jessica held a first-class ticket, neatly stored in her phone. But from the moment she stepped into the priority line for first-class passengers, suspicious and probing looks had begun to fall on her. They scrutinized her clothing, her simple ponytail, and began whispering. When it was her turn, Jessica stepped forward calmly, holding up the screen of her phone, showing her first-class ticket clearly to the young man at the counter, Kyle Thompson. Kyle, dressed in a sharp suit with a shiny name tag, flashed a polite smile to the previous passenger, but as soon as Jessica approached, his expression changed instantly. The smile vanished, replaced by an air of suspicion. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Kyle said coldly, almost condescendingly. "This is the line for first-class and business-class passengers." "I know," Jessica replied briefly, her voice calm but firm. She kept the phone screen right in front of him. Kyle glanced at the ticket distractedly, not even bothering to scan it. He immediately turned his head, whispered something to a colleague nearby, and signaled for 2 security officers to approach. Jessica felt the situation slipping out of control, but she remained composed. Passengers behind her began to murmur, some glancing at her with annoyance. The tension in the air grew thick. The 2 security officers, tall and dressed in dark blue uniforms, approached quickly. One of the men looked at her with a cold, stern gaze. "Please step out of line for us to check," he ordered. "Did I do something wrong?" Jessica asked, trying to stay calm, though she was beginning to feel frustrated with the clear discrimination. "Just follow our instructions," the security officer replied, his voice as cold as his demeanor. Jessica was pulled aside amid the judging looks and whispers of the onlookers. She glanced at Kyle, who was now standing with his arms crossed, a look of satisfaction on his face, as if he had just handled an unwelcome intruder. She stood still, took a deep breath to maintain her composure. She knew she wasn't a typical passenger today, but those around her had no idea who she really was. She silently told herself, "They don't know that I'm the one who decides the future of this airline." In that moment, Jessica made the decision to remain silent. She wanted to see just how far this discrimination would push her. None of those who had just looked at her with disdain could have imagined that, just a few hours later, the entire airport system would be shaken by the real power this seemingly simple woman held in her hands. As Jessica was escorted away, those around her breathed a sigh of relief, their eyes filled with judgment, as if she were a lost guest trying to intrude into a world that didn't belong to her. But amidst the murmurs of racial bias, no one knew that she was the one holding invisible power, power enough to completely change the fate of this prestigious airline. Jessica Carter was not just a regular passenger with a first-class ticket in hand. She was the one holding the final vote in a $4 billion merger deal between Havenport Air and Genesis Financial Holdings. Just one signature from her could instantly disrupt the entire financial system, business strategy, and the future of thousands of employees. However, Jessica wasn't here to show off her power or prove herself. She had arrived at the airport early this morning with a special task, one assigned by the board of Genesis Holdings, to conduct a reality check on how Havenport Air treated customers who appeared to be inconsequential. "We need to know," the chairman of Genesis had said to her in a closed-door meeting, "how they treat someone they consider insignificant. Give them a chance to show their true face." At this moment, Jessica stood silently in a corner, where two security officers were unnecessarily checking her documents. She calmly surveyed the surroundings. The indifferent faces of the airport staff, the smug look of Kyle Thompson, the one responsible for this incident, were all evidence of the deep-seated prejudices they hid behind a facade of politeness. Kyle was not an outright villain, but he was a perfect product of a silent system of discrimination, always ready to place doubts on those who didn't fit their mold. Kyle Thompson, at just 27 years old, had always been proud of his job. Coming from a well-off family in the suburbs, he graduated with a degree in hospitality management and quickly rose to a customer service management position at JFK Airport. For Kyle, his job was about protecting the comfort of high-end customers, ensuring no one crossed the boundaries of wealth unless they truly deserved it. However, Kyle had never realized that the principles and biases he held had transformed him from a polite employee into someone complicit in perpetuating deep injustice and inequality. As Jessica calmly explained her situation to the security officers, Kyle walked over and whispered to a colleague loud enough for Jessica to hear. "Probably just another upgrade with frequent flyer miles. I'm used to it. These people always think that as long as they have enough points, they have the right to bother real first-class passengers." Kyle's colleague chuckled lightly and nodded in agreement. In that moment, Jessica felt a slight stir in her heart, but she showed no outward reaction. Having grown accustomed to such looks, Jessica gently responded to the security officer. "I have all the proper documentation and a valid ticket. Please verify it with the system once again." The security officer hesitated for a moment, but at Jessica's determined gaze he reluctantly checked again. After scanning the QR code on her phone, the system emitted a confirming beep, and the screen displayed the large words, "First Class, Priority Passenger." The security officer immediately appeared flustered, glancing at Kyle for an explanation. Kyle shrugged, his expression now irritated, and signaled for Jessica to return to the queue. Jessica calmly walked back to the priority line, unaffected as if nothing had happened, but her silence now carried a power that made Kyle and those around him feel uncomfortable and uneasy. Jessica had decided to keep her identity a secret, for what she wanted to see was not empty apologies from those who had wronged her, but how the entire system operated and treated someone they believed would not fight back. She walked lightly onto the jet bridge, the whispers of passengers behind her still filled with doubt and discussion about her. However, none of them knew that in just a few hours, the name Jessica Carter would become the worst nightmare in the careers of those silently belittling her now. Jessica sat in her first-class seat, exhaling a deep breath, her eyes gazing out the window. She thought to herself, "They just awakened a power they never expected, and now it's my turn to decide their fate." From the moment Jessica settled into her first-class seat, she knew the biggest challenge still lay ahead. The real purpose of this trip wasn't simply to experience a typical luxury flight. In fact, Jessica was secretly carrying out a top-secret mission. She had been entrusted by Genesis Financial Holdings to assess the attitude and behavior of Havenport Air's staff towards anonymous passengers, those they assumed did not belong in such a prestigious environment. Jessica had deliberately chosen the simplest attire she could: a dark hoodie, faded jeans, and a slightly worn pair of sneakers. Over her shoulder was a plain canvas bag, with no logos from any high-end brand. Her appearance could not have been more ordinary without any sign of power or fame, but that was exactly what Jessica wanted: a true mirror to reflect the true face of this esteemed airline. As soon as Jessica settled in, she began to notice the scrutinizing gaze of head flight attendant Olivia Sloan. Olivia, a woman in her late 30s with neatly styled hair and a smile always ready for wealthy customers, lost her smile the moment her eyes landed on Jessica. Her gaze shifted to one of suspicion, as if Jessica's presence was an anomaly, an uncomfortable deviation in a space reserved for the elite. As other passengers settled into their seats, Olivia immediately began serving the first-class customers with marked enthusiasm. She hurried over to a middle-aged businessman's seat, kindly offering him a warm towel. When it was Jessica's turn, Olivia hesitated for a moment before quickly turning away, moving toward the row behind her, intentionally bypassing Jessica as if she were an invisible, empty seat. Jessica sat still, fully aware that every step and gesture was being observed and judged. This wasn't just casual indifference. It was a clear message of prejudice and contempt. But Jessica said nothing, made no reaction. She knew that silence was the best way to let people like Olivia reveal their true nature. Olivia Sloan had grown up in a middle-class family in Connecticut and always dreamed of rising to a higher social class. Her role as a head flight attendant at Havenport Air had granted her access to the glamorous world she had always desired. But it was also this very access that led Olivia to unconsciously believe she had the right to decide who belonged in this luxurious space and who did not. To her, someone like Jessica Carter clearly didn't meet the proper criteria for sitting in first class, no matter the fact that Jessica's ticket proved otherwise. A little while later, Olivia passed by again. Jessica gently raised her hand to signal her. "Excuse me, I haven't received the warm towel like the other passengers." Olivia looked at Jessica with a glance that tried to mask her irritation, offering a forced, awkward smile. "Oh, I thought you didn't need it. I'll be back in a moment." With that, Olivia hurried away, leaving Jessica once again sitting in silence. But Jessica wasn't angry. Instead, she felt a deep sense of disappointment. She understood that this was just a small part of the larger picture of discrimination that passengers like her endured every day. When Olivia returned with the warm towel in hand, she handed it to Jessica dismissively, without any apology or explanation. Jessica took it gently, saying, "Thank you," but Olivia quickly turned away, leaving her with a look still full of suspicion and discomfort. The more Jessica observed, the more she realized one thing: these attitudes didn't stem from an individual alone. It was the result of an entire underground system, where racial and social status prejudices had deeply infiltrated the minds of those who operated it. Olivia Sloan and Kyle Thompson weren't inherently evil, but they were both typical products of a culture of subtle contempt, where judging others by their appearance had become routine. Jessica leaned back in her seat, gazing at the sky through the small window beside her. A sense of determination began to grow clearer within her than ever before. She silently promised herself that today would be the day she forced all these people to face the consequences of the attitudes they so carelessly displayed. Because Jessica knew that in just a few hours, she would no longer be an anonymous passenger testing the system. The power she held in her hands was enough to change everything, to make people like Olivia and Kyle regret the way they treated her today. She smiled gently, silently thinking to herself, "Keep going. I want to see just how far you think you can go." Even as the plane gently lifted off the runway, the moments Jessica had just experienced at security still lingered in her mind. She clearly remembered every skeptical question from Kyle Thompson and the cold, uncomfortable demeanor of the TSA agent. Subtle discrimination veiled under the guise of random checks. The moment Jessica stood before airport security, Kyle had quickly appeared, eyeing her with a look of suspicion, as if searching for some evidence to prove that she didn't belong in this world. "What are you doing in Boston?" Kyle asked, his tone more interrogative than curious. "Work," Jessica responded briefly but clearly. "What kind of work?" Kyle pressed, his gaze never leaving her face, waiting for a slip-up. Jessica calmly looked him in the eye, keeping her voice gentle but firm. "A crucial meeting." Kyle wasn't satisfied with that answer. He turned to the TSA agent standing nearby and whispered something. The agent immediately walked over and coldly told Jessica, "Please step aside for additional security screening." Jessica immediately understood that this wasn't the random check they wanted her to believe it was. This was a deliberate attempt to make things difficult for her, discrimination cloaked under the pretext of airport security procedures. The TSA agent instructed Jessica to open her handbag. He rifled through her belongings with a detached attitude, showing no respect. Jessica stood silently, patiently observing. Her bag held only a few basic personal items and a sealed envelope. The agent stopped, holding the envelope up and asking suspiciously, "What is this?" "Work documents," Jessica replied calmly. "What kind of documents?" He continued to interrogate. Jessica took a soft breath and responded evenly, "Confidential information related to a major deal for my company." The TSA agent stared at her, his expression filled with more doubt. He handed the envelope to Kyle, seemingly seeking confirmation from him. Kyle scrutinized the outside of the envelope, then coldly said, "All right, let her go." Jessica took her bag and envelope back, receiving no apology. She walked toward the boarding gate, her heart heavy not with anger, but with deep disappointment in the reality unfolding around her. What had just happened was the clearest proof of a silent but powerful form of discrimination. It wasn't carried out through overt, violent actions, but through the subtle doubts and probing questions of people like Kyle and the TSA agent. Kyle Thompson stood there, watching Jessica with an expression of both frustration and disappointment. He couldn't understand why Jessica remained so calm. In Kyle's mind, people like Jessica should have panicked, should have been threatened, should have felt fear from the pressure he deliberately exerted. But Jessica was different. Her silence and composure made Kyle feel more uneasy than ever. Jessica climbed the airplane steps, gently sitting down in her seat and letting out a long, quiet breath. She looked out the window, the sky stretching out in an endless sea of blue, with not a cloud in sight. But Jessica knew all too well that the invisible clouds of prejudice and injustice still hovered over her and many others, growing thicker with each passing day. She silently reminded herself that this time she would not remain silent forever. What had just happened only strengthened her resolve. Jessica was not simply an ordinary passenger. She was here to make the entire system face itself. "You picked the wrong person to underestimate," Jessica thought to herself, her gaze sharpening with determination. "Now, get ready to face the consequences of the actions you've caused." As soon as the airplane door closed, Jessica realized that this flight would not be as easy as she had hoped. While on the ground, the doubts from Kyle Thompson and the TSA agent had disappointed her. But on this flight, the deliberate coldness from head flight attendant Olivia Sloan hurt even more. Olivia Sloan moved gracefully between the first-class seats, always wearing a bright smile for each passenger she deemed worthy. But the moment Olivia's eyes met Jessica's, that smile immediately vanished, replaced by a cold, indifferent stare. She walked past Jessica's seat as if it didn't exist, an invisible void between the luxurious leather seats. Other passengers were promptly offered warm towels, welcome drinks, and menus featuring upscale meals. When it was Jessica's turn, Olivia deliberately ignored her, not even glancing in her direction. This wasn't a small oversight or accidental indifference. It was a deliberate act, a powerful message of contempt that Olivia wanted to send to Jessica. Jessica gently raised her hand when Olivia passed by again. "Excuse me, I haven't received a menu or a drink." Olivia turned back, feigning surprise, her eyes wide as if trying to remember something. "Oh, really? I thought you didn't need one." "Wait a moment," she said. With that, Olivia quickly walked away, but Jessica could see in her eyes that there was no goodwill or regret. A few minutes later, Olivia returned and placed a cold drink in front of Jessica, completely different from the premium drinks being served to other passengers. The menu was placed down reluctantly, and Olivia didn't say a word, nor did she offer even a fake smile. Jessica remained calm and gently asked, "I noticed the other passengers received warm towels. May I have one as well?" Olivia stopped, her eyes showing brief annoyance, but she quickly covered it with a faint, cold smile. "Sorry, we have a limited number of towels. I'll check to see if there are any left and come back." Jessica knew that the answer was a lie. In fact, there were always plenty of towels prepared on first-class flights, but Jessica didn't react strongly. She simply nodded. "Thank you, I'll wait." Olivia quickly walked to the service area, a touch of frustration in her step. To Olivia, Jessica's presence in first class was not only an anomaly, but also a nuisance she was trying to dismiss. Olivia had always taken pride in her ability to serve high-end customers, but that came with a critical assessment of each passenger's appearance, attitude, and style. In her world, Jessica clearly didn't meet any of the standards to be treated like a true VIP. Olivia had grown up in an environment that valued glamour, luxury, and high standards. Over the years working for Havenport Air, she had become accustomed to serving powerful, wealthy passengers, and with each encounter, Olivia further reinforced her belief that she belonged to that elite class. For her, Jessica sitting in first class today wasn't just an oversight. It was a personal insult, something she would not accept easily. When Olivia returned, she handed Jessica a cold, damp towel, completely different from the warm, lavender-scented towels offered to the other passengers. Olivia didn't explain, didn't apologize, and quickly placed the towel down, leaving immediately as if she were eager to avoid any more contact with Jessica. Jessica held the cold towel in her hand, letting out a quiet sigh. She wasn't angry, but she deeply felt the injustice and discrimination happening silently on this flight. Jessica knew that Olivia's actions weren't just an individual misstep. They were a reflection of a deep-seated system of prejudice embedded in the culture of this airline. Jessica's gaze drifted toward the window, the sky now clearer and broader, but within her, there was a growing sense of resolve. Jessica was no longer surprised, but she wasn't planning to give up or tolerate this forever. She gently clenched her hand, her eyes sharpening. Jessica understood that it was time for people like Olivia Sloan to face the consequences of the discriminatory attitudes they had come to treat as normal. Jessica whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning. Soon they'll realize the biggest mistake they made was choosing the wrong person to underestimate." The cold towel that Olivia had placed before Jessica remained on the table. a symbol of the indifference and subtle discrimination Jessica had endured since boarding the flight. But Jessica didn't allow herself to dwell on the discomfort for long, because she knew the experiment was far from over. It could even become more intense. Less than 10 minutes later, Olivia Sloane returned to Jessica's seat, this time with a completely different attitude. Olivia was holding a tablet, her face deliberately serious, trying to emphasize the importance of the situation. "Miss Carter, I have a small issue I need to discuss with you." Jessica looked up, her gaze calm as she gently replied, "Yes, I'm listening." Olivia cleared her throat, attempting professionalism, though her voice still betrayed a hint of suppressed frustration beneath the veneer of politeness. "We've just received a notification from the ground crew. Due to some weight balance issues on the flight, I'm sorry to inform you that I must ask you to move to economy class." Jessica paused for a few seconds, staring deeply into Olivia's eyes, quickly realizing that the reason Olivia gave was nothing more than an unreasonable excuse, with no actual basis. In her heart, Jessica understood this was simply an escalation, a petty tactic Olivia was using to put pressure on her. "I'm sorry," Jessica replied calmly, but her voice was firm. "But I have paid in full for this first-class seat. I don't think it's reasonable to ask me to change seats at this point." Olivia clearly felt uncomfortable with Jessica's gentle but resolute response. A flash of anger flickered in her eyes, but it was quickly hidden under her forced professional mask. "I understand, but this is a request from the ground crew to ensure the safety of the entire flight. I hope you'll cooperate." Jessica gave a slight smile, looking at Olivia more deeply this time, as if to let her know that Jessica was fully aware of her intentions. If it's truly an issue of weight balance, perhaps it would be better to check with the other passengers. I don't understand why I alone am being asked to move. Jessica's words were like a sharp needle piercing through Olivia's professional facade. Olivia hesitated for a moment, but quickly regained her fake, serious expression, responding mechanically. "We've carefully reviewed the situation, and unfortunately your seat is the most appropriate choice." Jessica looked at Olivia one more time, her gaze still calm, her voice gentle but unwavering. "I'm truly sorry, but I will be keeping this seat. If there is really a safety issue, I think the airline should come up with a more reasonable solution than forcing a customer who has booked a first-class ticket to move to economy." Olivia instinctively gripped her tablet tightly, her face flushing with anger and frustration. She wasn't used to being so directly challenged by a customer, especially not from someone she had been looking down on since Jessica first boarded. To Olivia, Jessica wasn't just an inappropriate passenger anymore. She was someone daring to defy the power and prestige Olivia had always prided herself on. Deep down, Olivia couldn't accept this. Jessica's firm refusal wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a direct blow to Olivia's pride, to the belief that she was the one who had the right to decide who deserved what position on the flight. Olivia struggled to control her voice, which trembled with anger, and responded briefly with a cold expression. "I will report your refusal to cooperate to the captain. If anything arises, we won't take responsibility." Jessica calmly nodded, never losing her composure. "Very well, I completely agree." Olivia turned and walked briskly toward the service area, each step carrying the frustration that was boiling inside her. She felt diminished, challenged in a way she had never encountered before. In Olivia's eyes, Jessica was no longer just a passenger. She was an adversary that Olivia now felt compelled to subdue at any cost. Jessica sat alone, taking a deep breath, her gaze still fixed on the window. She knew that this confrontation wasn't just a personal matter between her and Olivia. It was a battle against an entire system of subtle discrimination. The determination and calm she showed weren't just to defend her own rights, but to make people like Olivia realize something important. Not everyone will easily submit to the power they think they hold in their hands. Jessica whispered to herself, "Keep raising the tension. I'm ready to face it all, and in the end, you will be the ones to pay the price." The tense atmosphere between Jessica and Olivia had barely settled when, from the row beside her, a deep, grating voice suddenly broke the silence of the first-class cabin. "I don't understand how someone like her could be here." The speaker was Robert Davis, a middle-aged white businessman with neatly combed gray hair, exuding an air of arrogance and confidence. He wasn't trying to speak softly. Rather, his voice was loud enough for everyone around, including Jessica, to hear clearly. Jessica was momentarily taken aback by this open insult, but she quickly regained her composure. Her gaze briefly shifted to Robert Davis, who was looking at her with clear disdain, as if she were an anomaly in the world of elites, a foreign object out of place in their space. "I've flown first class many times, but this is the first time I've seen a passenger who looks like this in the premium cabin," Robert continued, his voice dripping with discomfort. The passengers around them immediately turned their gaze toward Jessica, some trying to hide smirks while others silently observed, waiting for an explanation from her. Olivia Sloane, sensing the opportunity, quickly moved closer, a fake smile plastered on her face. She lowered her voice just enough for everyone to hear, clearly siding with Robert. Maybe she upgraded using frequent flyer miles. It happens sometimes. It's really unfortunate if someone feels uncomfortable because of it. Immediately, a few chuckles arose from the nearby passengers, clearly amused by Olivia's insinuating comment. Robert nodded in approval, as if he had just received a reasonable explanation for Jessica's baffling presence in first class. Jessica felt her heart race slightly at the blatant offense, but instead of getting angry or engaging in an argument, she remained calm, her eyes unwaveringly fixed on Olivia and Robert. She spoke softly, but clearly, enough for everyone around to hear every word. "I don't think using frequent flyer miles or purchasing a ticket directly should make a passenger different in terms of their rights or dignity on this flight. All first-class passengers deserve the same respect, don't they?" Olivia was momentarily surprised by Jessica's composed and firm response. She had been expecting some confusion or anger from Jessica, but the calm confidence in her tone made Olivia feel more challenged than ever before. Robert Davis furrowed his brow, clearly displeased that Jessica had responded so calmly. In Robert's mind, people like Jessica shouldn't speak up, especially not with the confidence and equality that matched his own. In his prejudiced worldview, Jessica had disrupted the natural order, and he couldn't accept that so easily. "I'm just voicing the thoughts of many people here," Robert responded coldly, trying to salvage some of his dignity. "But clearly, she doesn't fit in like the others. Some people truly belong in places like this, and some don't." His words were like a sharp knife, but Jessica remained unfazed. She simply smiled gently and responded in a measured tone. "Perhaps Mr. Davis has never considered that sometimes the people he deems unfit for this place are actually the ones holding the most important things that he can't even imagine." Jessica's implied words and her unusual calmness made Robert feel uneasy, a cold shiver running down his spine. Olivia sensed it too, but her pride and ingrained biases quickly drowned out that feeling. Olivia quickly regained her usual cold composure, giving Jessica one last glance before turning away, leaving behind a murmuring atmosphere filled with the whispers of other passengers. Jessica leaned back in her seat, her gaze directed toward the window. In her heart, there was no anger or sorrow, only a stronger resolve than ever before. The insults just now didn't wound her. In fact, they only added fuel to the fire of determination inside her. Jessica silently vowed with great strength, "They've gone too far. It's time for me to show them that true power doesn't always need to speak loudly. It just needs to act at the right time and in the right place." As the plane gently touched down on the runway, Jessica's mind remained heavy from the insults she had endured from Olivia Sloane and Robert Davis. She quietly gathered her belongings, preparing to leave the plane in a weary mood, but little did she know the situation was far from over. As soon as the cabin door opened, 2 airport security officers swiftly boarded the plane. They moved quickly, their cold eyes scanning the cabin before they stopped at Jessica's seat. One of them spoke in a stern and emotionless tone. "Are you Jessica Carter? We need you to come with us for some clarification." Jessica flinched slightly, feeling her heart race. The curious, even suspicious stares from the surrounding passengers turned toward her once again, as if she were some kind of threat. Robert Davis and Olivia Sloane watched her with smug expressions, clearly enjoying the scene unfolding before them. Jessica kept her composure, standing up and gently asking the security officers, "May I ask why?" The security officer coldly responded, "We've received a report regarding your suspicious and disruptive behavior on the flight. We request your cooperation." Jessica didn't argue further. She knew that any resistance would only worsen the situation. Quietly, she followed the 2 officers as they led her through the row of seats, the eyes of the passengers around her still on her, their whispers full of judgment. Her gaze met Olivia's triumphant face as she stood near the airplane door, wearing a satisfied, knowing smile, as if she had achieved her goal. Jessica was escorted to a small, dimly lit room in a secluded area of the airport, where the harsh fluorescent lights made the atmosphere even more tense. The room was bare except for an old wooden table, 2 cold metal chairs, and a dull gray wall. She clearly felt as though she was being treated like a criminal, being detained for an unfounded investigation. A few minutes later, an older security officer entered, his face stern, holding a report that had clearly been printed in haste. He sat across from Jessica, looking at her with cold, skeptical eyes, then began his questioning. "We've received a report that you engaged in disruptive behavior on the flight. Can you explain this?" Jessica took a deep breath, trying to remain calm despite the storm of injustice she was facing. "I'm not clear on which specific behavior you're referring to. I was completely cooperative and polite throughout the flight." The officer glanced down at the report in his hands and read aloud in an accusing tone. "According to the statements of head flight attendant Olivia Sloane and another passenger, Mr. Robert Davis, you engaged in defiant behavior, refused to comply with safety instructions, caused disruption to the staff, and made the other passengers feel uncomfortable." Jessica paused for a moment. The accusations were absurd, yet they had been carefully crafted to undermine her honor and rights. She understood immediately that this was a direct retaliation from Olivia, trying to use her authority to make Jessica pay for her disobedience. Jessica looked straight into the officer's eyes, her voice still calm but filled with conviction. "None of those accusations are true. I only requested my legitimate rights in a polite manner. I have never defied anyone or caused any trouble." The officer remained cold, his eyes narrowing as if trying to read her thoughts. Then he answered briefly with a lingering doubt. "What you're saying is completely contradictory to the testimonies of the witnesses on the plane. I will need you to stay here for further clarification." Jessica felt the weight of the injustice pressing down on her. This wasn't just an ordinary interrogation. It was an invisible punishment, a way for the system to crush her confidence and dignity. But Jessica didn't allow herself to break under pressure. She knew who she was, and she wouldn't let them easily achieve their goals. She looked at the officer one more time, her gaze firm and clearer than ever. "If you want clarification, I'm happy to cooperate. But I suggest you double-check your information. I believe the truth will soon be revealed, and those who made false accusations will have to be held accountable." The officer raised his eyebrows slightly, seemingly surprised by Jessica's calm and resolute demeanor. But he said nothing more, standing up and leaving the room, leaving her alone between the cold walls. Jessica sighed lightly, her eyes staring into the empty space before her. A powerful resolve surged inside her. "They've made a huge mistake trying to insult and detain me. I won't let this slide. It's time for them to understand the real power I hold." The small, dimly lit room sank into silence after the security officer closed the door behind him. Jessica sat still on the cold chair, her eyes straight ahead, but her mind was racing. She knew the moment had come to turn the tables. There was no room for silence or submission anymore. After a while, the door opened again, and this time, a middle-aged man with a stern demeanor entered, followed by the younger security officer, Dana Reyes. The man was Eric Dempsey, a senior security supervisor at the airport. Eric pulled out a chair and sat across from Jessica, his face clouded with discomfort. "Miss Carter, I'm Eric Dempsey, in charge of security here. We've received reports that you caused a disturbance on the flight. I need a clear explanation from you about these actions." Jessica looked up at Eric and Dana, her calm gaze making them both feel uneasy. Slowly and deliberately, Jessica opened her simple cloth bag and pulled out a special envelope sealed with a bright red wax stamp. Her movement was gentle, yet authoritative, as if sending a warning that what was about to happen was no trivial matter. "Before we continue this conversation," Jessica spoke softly but with a hidden strength, "I'd like you both to take a look at this." Eric and Dana exchanged a brief, puzzled glance. Jessica placed the envelope on the table, pushing it lightly toward them. Eric took it cautiously, opening the seal with a careful hand, his heart racing with tension and unease. As the contents of the document became clear before their eyes, Eric's expression shifted from confident to stunned, then to complete shock. Beside him, Dana Reyes couldn't hide her surprise and fear. The document was legal, clearly identifying Jessica Carter and her true role. She was the one holding the final decision-making power in the $4 billion merger between Havenport Air and Genesis Financial Holdings. The sharp lines of text hit Eric and Dana like a series of blows, leaving them dazed by this earth-shattering revelation. Jessica was not just an ordinary passenger. She was someone whose existence and decisions could alter the fate and future of the airline itself. Is this real?" Eric stammered, his voice shaking, his eyes never leaving the document in his hand. Jessica nodded gently, her gaze still calm but brimming with authority. "It's completely true. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to evaluate the attitudes and behavior of this airline staff toward its customers, and it seems the results are already quite clear, wouldn't you agree?" Eric felt as though his pride had been brutally struck. A man who had always prided himself on his management skills, he never imagined he could make such a grave mistake. His mind was filled with fear about the consequences, as he knew better than anyone that if Jessica made a negative decision, the entire airline would pay a hefty price. Dana stood beside them, her face pale, trembling at the frightening prospect now clearly before her. She glanced at Jessica, trying to speak in a weak voice. "Miss Carter, I'm sincerely sorry. We misunderstood you." Jessica didn't rush to respond, her eyes slowly and deeply scanning both of them, making the atmosphere feel even more suffocating. She spoke gently, each word clear and deliberate as if etching them into their minds. "I've said from the start that you made a mistake by judging me based solely on my appearance and baseless prejudices. You don't realize that real power doesn't always show itself through flashy things or meeting your standards." Eric had completely lost his earlier composure, now visibly panicked. He hurriedly stood up, bowing his head in shame. "We sincerely apologize for this serious mistake. I assure you we will immediately investigate and take strict action against those involved in this matter. We will take full responsibility." Jessica gently raised her hand to stop Eric, her eyes no longer filled with anger but calm, tinged with pity for those who had deliberately disrespected her. "I don't need empty promises. I need real action. Remember, a single signature from me can completely change the fate of the multi-billion-dollar deal that you so desperately need." The room once again fell into a tense silence after Jessica's declaration. Eric and Dana could clearly feel the weight of the truth they had just witnessed, a truth neither of them had ever prepared to face. They understood that this mistake would not only impact their personal careers, but could affect an entire system. Jessica calmly stood up, looking directly at Eric and Dana one last time, softly speaking. "Now, tell me, what are you going to do to correct these mistakes?" As Jessica's powerful words hung in the air, the atmosphere in the small room grew heavy. Eric Dempsey and Dana Reyes sat in silence, their faces filled with confusion, as they realized they had lost control of the situation. Both now understood that the woman they had assumed was insignificant was, in fact, the key to the future of the airline. Jessica calmly took out a special phone from her bag. She gently pressed the screen, activating a highly secure encrypted application. Within seconds, a flashing green signal appeared, confirming a direct connection to the board of directors at Genesis Holdings. Her voice was soft but resolute as it clearly rang out. "I, Jessica Carter, confirm the activation of the Special Legal Protection Procedure, Code 9903A, to address the violation of customer rights and discriminatory treatment by Havenport Air." Eric felt each of Jessica's words hit him like powerful waves, completely disrupting everything he had once believed to be secure and certain. Dana stood beside him, almost holding her breath, her heart racing with panic at the unfolding consequences. Less than a minute later, Eric's personal phone rang incessantly. He hastily pulled it from his pocket, his face paling as he saw the incoming call from the highest office at Havenport Air. Eric answered the call, his voice trembling with fear as the angry voice on the other end erupted. "Eric, what's going on? I just received an urgent call from Genesis Holdings. Do you understand how serious the consequences of this are?" The voice of Leonard Westbrook, the powerful and proud CEO of Havenport Air, boomed through the phone. Leonard had always prided himself on his leadership and never accepted any mistake that could tarnish the reputation and integrity of the airline. But now, Leonard felt completely powerless and out of control as he realized the situation with Jessica could destroy everything he had worked for over the years. Eric stammered in response, his voice shaking with fear. "Mr. Westbrook, I'm so sorry. There's been a very serious misunderstanding. The passenger we just dealt with is Ms. Jessica Carter, the one who holds the final signing authority for the deal with Genesis Holdings. We didn't know her true identity, and—" "What have you done?" Leonard roared into the phone, his anger mixed with clear panic. "I just received a notification from Genesis Holdings. The $4 billion merger deal is being frozen indefinitely, because of the discriminatory actions we've taken toward her." Leonard's words hit like an earthquake, leaving Eric and Dana pale with shock. Both were now fully aware of the dire consequences that were about to fall on them. Dana trembled, and Eric nearly lost his composure. He tried to regain his calm, answering weakly, "Mr. Westbrook, I assure you, we will do everything to rectify this immediately. We'll publicly apologize and withdraw all accusations against Ms. Carter." Leonard cut him off, his voice laced with a warning. "You have no other option. I want you to immediately cancel all accusations against her, publicly apologize, and ensure that Ms. Carter is treated according to her rightful rights and position. If you don't, you'll all be out of a job today." Eric stood frozen, the phone in his hand feeling like a weight on his shoulders. For the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless in this situation. Jessica remained silent, calmly observing the unfolding events before her. She didn't say another word, but her silence was more powerful than any condemnation, making Eric and Dana even more fearful of the invisible power she held. After ending the call with Leonard, Eric looked at Jessica, his voice filled with regret, completely losing his initial arrogance. "Miss Carter, I sincerely apologize for everything that has happened. We will immediately cancel all accusations and take full responsibility for this incident." Jessica nodded gently, her gaze still calm but filled with authority. "I accept your apology, but I hope you understand that what I need is not just an apology. What I truly want is for this airline to seriously reflect on itself, to ensure that no other passenger is treated the way I was." Eric and Dana lowered their heads in silence, unable to respond. They realized that in this confrontation, Jessica was the one in control. The power had completely shifted, and now, Havenport Air was dependent on her forgiveness and decision. Jessica slowly stood up, gently gathering her belongings, her eyes briefly glancing over the two dazed figures in front of her. Her voice was soft but clear and powerful. "Now, I think we should go back and face the consequences of what you've done. It's time for this airline to learn an important lesson. Power doesn't lie in appearances, but in how you treat each and every one of your passengers." As soon as Jessica walked out of the room, her authority clearly asserted, a quiet storm immediately began to spread throughout the meeting rooms and executive offices of Havenport Air. The message from CEO Leonard Westbrook rang out like a loud warning bell. An immediate internal investigation was required to clarify the responsibility of the individuals involved. In less than an hour, Olivia Sloan, Kyle Thompson, and all the employees involved in the incident received urgent summons to the main conference room. When Olivia received the news, she was still proudly recounting the story to her colleagues about how she had successfully dealt with the troublesome passenger. But as she held the summons in her hand, her self-satisfied smile immediately vanished, replaced by a brief moment of fear she couldn't conceal. Kyle Thompson, who had believed he was justified in doubting Jessica from the start, quickly realized the gravity of the situation when he saw the heavy atmosphere in the conference room. Cold sweat dripped from his forehead, and his heart began to race. For the first time in his career, he felt truly unsettled. The large meeting room was filled with a suffocating tension as Security Supervisor Eric Dempsey and the internal investigator entered, carrying recording devices and thick binders filled with documents. Though Eric had not yet fully recovered from the shock of Jessica's power, he had regained his serious composure. He cleared his throat, his stern gaze sweeping over the anxious faces of those in the room. "We've been instructed to conduct an emergency investigation into the incident involving Ms. Jessica Carter. I expect everyone involved to be truthful in their statements. This is the only opportunity to clarify your actions." Olivia Sloane sat silently, her face pale, trying to maintain her composure. Kyle Thompson kept glancing around, seeking support from his colleagues, but all of them remained silent, avoiding his gaze. Shortly after, the large screen at the front of the room lit up, and video and audio footage extracted from the airport's security system began to play slowly, each moment clearly unfolding before everyone's eyes. Everything that had happened with Jessica, from the moment Kyle called security without bothering to check her ticket, to Olivia's repeated neglect to serve her, and the public insult from Robert Davis, was exposed in vivid detail. The room fell into a heavy silence as each word, every discriminatory act, and every disdainful glance became undeniable. When the screen paused on a clip showing Olivia whispering to a colleague and making the mocking comment, "She probably used frequent flyer miles to upgrade," the room erupted in whispers. All eyes turned toward Olivia. She tried to avoid their gazes, but the truth was undeniable, leaving her with no way to justify herself. Eric directed a stern look at Olivia, his voice as cold as ice. "Ms. Sloane, how do you explain your actions and comments? Are you aware that this is a serious case of discrimination, entirely unacceptable in our airline's workplace?" Olivia trembled as she responded, her voice noticeably shaky. I truly apologize. I was wrong to make those comments. I didn't mean it." Eric immediately interrupted her, his eyes growing even more stern. "You didn't mean it? The evidence we just reviewed is crystal clear. This is not the first time, is it, Ms. Sloane?" Olivia fell silent, her face completely drained of color, unable to utter another word in defense. Eric then turned his gaze to Kyle, his voice still sharp and commanding. "And you, Kyle Thompson, can you explain why you didn't even bother to check Miss Carter's ticket before calling security?" Kyle stammered, his face turning red with embarrassment and fear. I just thought she didn't fit. I misjudged. I'm really sorry." Eric sighed deeply, shaking his head slowly in disappointment. "What you've done isn't just a personal mistake. It's a clear reflection of a deeper issue, discrimination and bias embedded within our system. This is a serious stain that this airline must immediately eradicate." The people in the room all lowered their heads in silence, realizing that their careers and reputations were now hanging by a fragile thread. Actions that once seemed harmless were now exposed, forcing them to face a harsh truth. Discrimination is never a small matter, and it always carries severe consequences. Eric finally spoke again, his voice authoritative and serious. "I've reported the full results of this investigation to CEO Leonard Westbrook and the Board of Directors. You all need to be prepared to face the consequences of your actions. I hope this will be the most valuable lesson you've ever learned in your careers." Olivia, Kyle, and the others sat in absolute silence, not daring to look up. They understood that from this moment on, their lives and careers would never be the same. And they also understood that it was Jessica Carter, the woman they had deliberately disrespected, who now held their fates in the palm of her hand. The heavy atmosphere in the meeting room lingered, seemingly endless, until Eric Dempsey stood up again, holding a file that had just been delivered from the senior office. All eyes immediately turned to him, the tension so thick that it felt like everyone could hear each other's heartbeat in the silence. "We have reached an official conclusion from the internal investigation," Eric said slowly, his voice authoritative but tinged with clear disappointment. "The evidence we've reviewed is undeniable, and no one here can escape responsibility anymore." Eric took a deep breath, opened the file, and skimmed through it before starting to read the decision clearly and decisively. First, Kyle Thompson, the individual directly responsible for the incident at the priority gate, failing to follow ticket-checking procedures and exhibiting clear discrimination, will be immediately suspended indefinitely, pending a final decision from the disciplinary committee. As soon as this statement was made, Kyle's face turned ashen, his eyes filled with panic. He opened his mouth but couldn't find any words, instead lowering his head deeply, as if he wanted to escape the stares directed at him. Eric continued, now shifting his gaze to Olivia Sloane. Olivia sat motionless, her hands trembling as she clenched them tightly, trying to maintain composure but failing miserably. Head flight attendant Olivia Sloane, who directly exhibited severe discriminatory behavior on the flight, deliberately ignored the rights of a passenger and made offensive, disrespectful comments, will be demoted immediately and reassigned to domestic flights. From now on, Ms. Sloane will not be allowed to serve in any premium cabins of the airline. Olivia couldn't hide the bitterness and embarrassment creeping over her. The position of a head flight attendant had always been her pride, a symbol of her status, but now it was gone forever. Olivia realized that the hidden biases she had long kept behind her professional facade had finally come back to haunt her, and the price she was paying was steep. Eric paused for a moment, scanning the remaining employees in the room before continuing in a serious tone. Any other crew members involved in the flight will also be held accountable to varying degrees, depending on their roles and actions. Those who directly or indirectly supported or facilitated this discriminatory behavior will be strictly disciplined. You will all be informed separately about the decisions regarding your actions. The atmosphere in the meeting room grew colder than ever. Everyone sat in silence, no one daring to speak in their defense. They all now understood that their words and actions, which seemed minor at the time, had now led to serious consequences that would affect not only their careers, but also the reputation and credibility of the entire Havenport Airline. Eric closed the file, his gaze growing sharper. I hope this serves as an unforgettable lesson for all of us. Discrimination, in any form, will not be tolerated in this workplace. If we cannot respect every passenger, no matter their appearance or background, then we do not deserve to serve in this industry. The room fell into complete silence as Eric finished his harsh words. Kyle still sat there, head bowed, his mind heavy with the uncertainty of his future. Olivia fought back tears, struggling to conceal the anger she felt toward herself for her blind arrogance. The others sat quietly, questioning their consciences, wondering if they had, whether intentionally or unintentionally, contributed to the injustice of the day. Outside, news of the investigation's findings quickly spread throughout the departments of Havenport Air. People whispered, but no one dared to defend Kyle or Olivia, as the evidence was too clear and convincing. For the first time, the subtle system of discrimination that had existed within the company for so long was exposed, leaving everyone to feel embarrassed and ashamed. The investigation concluded with heavy yet necessary consequences, and no one could deny their wrongdoings. This event had completely changed the perception of all employees at Havenport Air, forcing them to reflect seriously and clearly on themselves and their attitudes. When Eric left the meeting room, he felt the weight in his heart, but there was also a sense of relief. He knew that, though painful, this investigation was the necessary step for the airline to regain the trust and reputation that had been severely damaged. Meanwhile, Jessica Carter also received the notification about the investigation's results. She nodded lightly in satisfaction, knowing that her courage to speak out had not been in vain. Jessica didn't take any joy in the consequences for those involved, but she was clear on one thing. Only when people face the consequences of their actions can they truly learn how to change. The investigation's results spread quickly throughout Havenport air like a silent but powerful wave, leaving behind a deep sense of shame and remorse that no one could easily shake off. Jessica Carter didn't speak out to criticize or publicly condemn anyone, but her quiet yet powerful silence became the clearest and harshest sentence for all those who had ever belittled or insulted her. The following days passed slowly in Olivia Sloane's mind. From being a prestigious first-class flight attendant, she was now just a regular crew member serving on domestic flights. Every day at work, Olivia felt the stares of curiosity, hushed whispers, and cold alienation from her colleagues. She tried to hide the pain and bitterness inside, but the more she tried to cover it, the deeper she felt herself sinking into a humiliating defeat. One late afternoon, in the vast and quiet corridor of the airport, Olivia accidentally crossed paths with Jessica Carter. Jessica still carried her simple demeanor, but this time an invisible aura of power surrounded her, causing Olivia to immediately feel suffocated and uneasy. Olivia tried to avoid Jessica's gaze, but as the distance between them closed, she knew she could no longer escape. Jessica walked slowly, each step radiating an absolute confidence and calmness. When she was just a few steps away, she stopped, her gaze gentle yet sharp, locking directly with Olivia's. A brief silence passed, but it was enough for Olivia to feel the full weight of the silence from the woman she had once publicly scorned. After a long, tense pause, Jessica gently spoke, her voice soft but clear, carrying authority with each word. "You're right, Miss Sloane. I don't belong in first class." Olivia looked up at Jessica, surprised and confused. She didn't understand what Jessica meant, but the unease in her chest grew stronger by the second. Jessica continued, her voice cold, deliberate, and steady. "Because I didn't come here to sit in first class. I came here to buy the whole thing." Jessica's short but powerful words sent a chill down Olivia's spine. She stood frozen, eyes wide in disbelief, her heart frozen by a truth she had never imagined. Now, Olivia understood clearly that from the very beginning, Jessica held a terrifying power far beyond anything she could have imagined. Olivia tried to speak, to offer an excuse or an apology, but all her words now seemed meaningless. Jessica's calmness made everything Olivia wanted to say feel redundant and futile. Olivia stood still, unable to say a word, her once confident and proud demeanor completely crumbling before the chilling composure of Jessica. Jessica said nothing more, simply nodding gently before walking forward, leaving Olivia standing rooted in the vast airport corridor. In that moment, Olivia felt, for the first time in her life, what true helplessness felt like in the face of real power. It wasn't harsh criticism, nor grand declarations. It was the quiet, authoritative stillness of Jessica that made Olivia endure the most humiliating feeling she had ever experienced. Jessica continued to walk slowly, each step radiating a clear sense of determination and resolve. She knew that sometimes the most effective punishment doesn't need to be delivered with words, but through the proud presence of oneself. When Jessica disappeared around the corner at the end of the hallway, Olivia felt as if she had just woken up from a nightmare. She stood there, motionless, with her heart heavy from late regret. Olivia realized that the false confidence she had always displayed had been completely crushed, and now she had to live with the painful truth that her own actions had led to this outcome. In the distance, Jessica walked with a sense of lightness and tranquility. She knew that her silence and composure today had delivered the clearest sentence for Olivia and everyone who had once looked down on her. That quiet punishment not only made them realize their mistakes, but also forced them to face the real consequences of the invisible, yet deeply destructive biases they had once created. Jessica gave a soft, knowing smile, understanding that she had completed her mission flawlessly. She didn't need to shout, argue, or protest. By simply being present with power and silence, she made everyone understand one important thing. True respect never comes from appearances, but from the way we treat others. That is the most enduring power of all. The aftermath of Jessica's encounter with Olivia continued to ripple throughout Havenport air like a powerful silent wave, leaving a lingering sense of shame and regret in everyone's hearts, one that would not easily fade. Jessica Carter never openly criticized or condemned anyone, but it was her silence, filled with undeniable strength, that became the clearest and most severe judgment for all those who had ever disrespected and insulted her. The following days passed slowly in Olivia Sloane's mind. From once being a proud head flight attendant, she was now just a regular employee serving on domestic flights. Every day at work, Olivia felt the curious stares, the whispers, and the cold avoidance from her colleagues. She tried to hide the pain and bitterness inside, but the more she tried to suppress it, the deeper she felt herself sinking into failure. One late afternoon, in the quiet, vast hallway of the airport, Olivia unexpectedly ran into Jessica Carter. Jessica still wore her simple attire, but this time, an invisible air of authority surrounded her, making Olivia feel instantly suffocated and uneasy. Olivia tried to avoid Jessica's gaze, but as the distance between them closed, she knew she couldn't escape it forever. Jessica walked slowly, each step exuding absolute confidence and composure. When she was only a few feet away, she stopped, her gaze gentle but sharp, as she locked eyes with Olivia. A brief silence followed, but it was deep enough for Olivia to feel the weight of the silence from the woman she had once openly disrespected. After a tense pause, Jessica spoke softly, her voice clear and powerful, carrying an undeniable authority. "Ms. Sloane, you're right. I don't belong in first class." Olivia lifted her eyes to meet Jessica's, a mix of surprise and confusion flickering in her heart. She didn't understand what Jessica was about to say, but the unease in her chest grew stronger. Jessica continued, her tone now colder, slower, and more deliberate. "Because I'm not here to sit in first class. I'm here to buy the whole thing." Jessica's brief but powerful words sent a shock through Olivia, making her feel as though a cold current had run down her spine. She froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her heart seemed to freeze as the truth she had never imagined sank in. Now, Olivia understood that from the very beginning, Jessica had held a power far greater than she had ever imagined. Olivia tried to speak, but every attempt at justification or apology seemed meaningless. Jessica's calmness made any words from Olivia feel unnecessary and futile. Olivia could only stand there, unable to speak, her former confidence and pride completely shattered by the eerie tranquility before her. Jessica said nothing more. She simply nodded gently and continued on her way, leaving Olivia standing rooted to the spot in the vast airport hallway. At that moment, Olivia realized, for the first time in her life, what true power really was. It was not in loud words or oppressive actions. It was in the calmness, the ability to endure, and in the right action taken at the right time with quiet dignity. As Jessica walked away slowly, each step full of resolve and determination, she knew that sometimes the most effective punishment doesn't come in words. It comes through the powerful presence and silence of a person. When Jessica disappeared around the corner, Olivia felt as though she had just emerged from a nightmare. She stood there, motionless, with a heart heavy with late regret. Olivia realized that the fake confidence she had always displayed had been completely crushed, and now she had to live with the painful truth. Her own actions had led to this outcome. Far away, Jessica walked with a light and peaceful heart. She knew that her silence and composure today had been the clearest sentence for Olivia, and everyone who had ever looked down on her. That silent punishment not only made them realize their mistakes but also forced them to face the true consequences of the invisible, yet destructive, biases they had created. Jessica smiled softly to herself, knowing that she had accomplished something more important than asserting personal power. She had helped everyone understand that a person's true value is never to be judged by appearance or social status. For Jessica, everything had ended far better than she had expected. She walked slowly and peacefully, knowing that her story would forever be remembered as the most vivid example of a simple, powerful truth. True power always lies in calmness and the right action at the right time, and sometimes silence is the most powerful voice. Jessica Carter's story was a living testament to the fact that true power doesn't need to be shown through noise or imposition. Sometimes silence and timely action are the strongest voices, capable of changing an entire system of injustice and prejudice. And you, if you were Jessica, would you have the patience and calm to face such discrimination and bias? Leave your comments below. Don't forget to like, share this story to spread its meaningful message, and subscribe to the channel to follow more exciting stories in the future. Goodbye, and see you soon.